How many of you in here are developers? All right, a few folks. IT administration? Okay. Anybody else that's not one of those? Just want to shout out what you do? Desktop? Like support? Okay. Security? Okay. So what I do for Microsoft is I talk mostly with developers about emerging technologies. Obviously, Windows 8 is something that's emerging very soon. For those who have MSDN licenses and you're in IT, you probably already know that it's been out now for a few weeks. And so when Dave had asked me last week if I was available to talk, I said sure. And because I normally talk to developers, we might go down that path a little bit more than you typically might see, but hopefully I'll be able to answer a lot of your questions. I think most of you probably know Young Cho, who's my colleague. He focuses on IT, and there's a few other folks on the IT team, like Blaine Barton down in Orlando, and a few others. Those guys focus on the IT infrastructure, so you probably see a lot more of them, and where I, along with a few other colleagues you might have met before, like Glenn Gordon and Andrew Duthie, we focus on the developer stack, so occasionally we cross paths a little bit. But up here are a couple of links. The bit.ly link /appin30 is a link to a developer program where what we're doing is we're offering one-on-one support for people to get their apps into the Windows 8 store. And we'll dive into this because I don't want to make the assumption that you know or have used Windows 8 quite yet. And my blog is up at structuretobig.com. Feel free to check that out and if you need to get in touch with me. So how many of you have seen Windows 8 and played around with it? All right. Wow. Okay. Pretty good number. Sometimes I'm never sure if I should ask how many have seen it or if I should ask how many have not seen it. It kind of depends on, I guess, which way I'm reading you, you know. But anyway, Windows 8, what I'd like to do is hopefully explain some of the principles in Windows 8, because I know some of you have not seen it, and talk about some of the device differences and changes in the operating system. Hopefully I'll be able to answer some of the IT-based questions. I know that there's probably quite a few based on the ARM architecture. But the idea with Windows 8 was to be a great operating system across all different types of tablets, devices, laptops, desktops. And one of the ways that we do that is through publishing out our guidelines for developing applications so that they work good with touch. So if you have, say, a slate device like I've got sitting here, and I guess it turned off on me, but if you have a slate device where it's touch, or if you'd rather use a mouse and keyboard, we wanted it to work fluently with both, and we can talk about how that's applied in the operating system. We also wanted to make sure that the power requirements were kept within reason, particularly with some of the devices, specifically on ARM. You've probably heard of the Microsoft Surface tablet, which will be coming out at launch, which is October 26th. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just jump ahead here to the picture of the start screen. Looks like this, and again, for those who have seen it, this is familiar to you. But the idea is that you can have a whole bunch of tiles. In this case, this is my start screen. And on this laptop, this is my primary work laptop. It doesn't have touch capability, but I just use the mouse or the track. In fact, I usually like to use the track point on it. And as you can see from my start screen here, I have a couple of apps kind of in the middle here. Outlook 2013, Maps, PowerPoint, and my Sling Player app. And those are legacy apps, or what I'll call just desktop apps. So you can see that not a whole lot is going on with those tiles. They're somewhat static. But a lot of the other ones you're seeing flip through a bunch of different content. And the content that they're flipping through is based on the application that it happens to be running. So if I have a People app or a Pictures app or a News app, we'll see all the content flip through or based on what those apps are doing in the background. And we call those live tiles. So the idea here is that you're your tiles, instead of just being a simple icon on the screen that launches into an application. The idea is that you can have different content of the tiles. You can see what are called these peak animations that will reveal additional content. If you don't want it, if you find it distracting either on a per app or system-wide basis, you could turn it off for certain tiles. But the nice thing about it is specific with some of the applications like weather. My desktop is a little bit changed here because I changed resolution, but you can see here for my weather app, since I live up near Greensboro, that it can put the weather directly on the tile, which is really nice, so I don't have to go into the app. Now, of course, I could go into the app if I wanted to see maybe the radar maps or the long-range forecast, that kind of thing. But there's something else we could do with these live tiles, is that applications can allow you to pin multiple live tiles for any given application. So if I traveled between Raleigh, Charlotte, and home, Greensboro, quite a bit, if I wanted to see the weather in each one, I could pin 3 of those with just, it's obviously just a single application, the weather app, but I could pin one to be home, the other one to be Raleigh, and the other one to be Charlotte if I wanted to, and I could see that content just for each one at a glance. And so that's the idea with these live tiles, is to give you information at a glance and then kind of tie it together so you don't necessarily have to keep hopping around into individual apps. Now, if I scroll all the way over, you'll see I have a bunch of legacy stuff here that's installed. Most of these are developer tools. And obviously, this type of screen isn't overly engaging, and most of the time, I typically don't even come this far over on the desktop. As you might seem, by the way, is that it scrolls horizontally, not vertically. But in this case, we can either uninstall apps just like you might expect from a desktop, or we could just remove these icons from this start screen if we wanted to, or pin them to the taskbar. We can do all those kinds of things if we'd like. We can also group items together. I'm just kidding about the crappy stuff. I just put that in there. Just to get a laugh. But what I did was I can group stuff together if I'd like, either office stuff or browsers or dev-related things or games. Whatever you'd like, it's pretty easy to group them and rearrange them, whatever works for you. Also, all the way on the left, you might have seen in the bottom left is this icon, and actually I think I moved it. Let's see, where's my... Oh, here it is. It got moved up here. Normally I have it in my lower left, but when you change resolutions, it just kind of rearranges things. So up there in the middle, I have, you might not be able to read the text on that, but it says desktop. And so instead of having you go directly to the desktop, this is the start screen where you typically will come right into the operating system. And when you click on desktop, in this case, I'm in my PowerPoint presentation, but there we go. And you can see here that now I'm on my desktop, and we have still everything that you're used to in a desktop from my icons, control panel, everything else that's here for me to play around with. In fact, most of the time when using my developer tools or Outlook or anything else, I tend to be in desktop mode. A lot of times I'll be in what we call the start screen or the modern UI. We'll be in that when using any of the applications. Sometimes mail, sometimes IE, kind of depends on what I'm doing. But we have those two experiences. And this is going to be hitting the stores October 26th. And as I mentioned, that's when all of our partners will have their machines and their new laptops, desktops, and tablets hitting. And we'll also have the Microsoft Surface, specifically the ARM version, will be available then. And then 90 days from then, Microsoft will have the Surface based on x86 architecture. And I want to take a moment to talk about that, the two different architectures and how they differ. But one of the things that the developer team, myself, Glenn, Andrew, a bunch of the other guys are working on is we're working one-on-one with a lot of developers to make sure they have the opportunity to get their apps inside the store. And I did not point that out, but if we go back to the start screen, you'll see that the store, and here it got moved on me someplace, so I got to find it now. It's usually There it is. Okay. So we have a store where, as you might expect, are all the applications that you can either download for free or purchase depending on what app it is. And we're currently, actually just today, finally opened up the app marketplace here for general submissions. Up until today, it was a somewhat closed process where you had to work with either the evangelism team or the PFE or Premier Field Engineering team to get access to it, because they were, part of it was the back-end services weren't quite ready, and the other part was they wanted to be very slow and deliberate about rolling out applications inside the store. So we're starting to see a lot more of these come up, and now, again, it's open for general submission. So with the developer team, we've pretty much know that from now until October 26th, our time is just going to be focused on helping people out. And that link that I had up on there, the bit.ly/appin30, takes you to our generation app page, and the idea there is we want to showcase how easy it is to write apps. Even as IT folks, if you're not a developer, we have a bunch of different frameworks, a way for building apps, and a lot of them are very simple. You know, we've worked on a few developer camps where we had some IT people develop simple apps for doing things like network tools and similar things that were real simple, easy to write, and hoping to see a lot of those get in the store. So if you're curious, you could either go to that page and fill it out if you have an app idea, or contact me. And like I said, as we're working one-on-one with as many people as possible to get the apps in there in time for general availability. Okay, so October 26th. There we go. All right. And the current footprint with Windows, in fact, it's this is a little bit dated. It's closer to 700 million, getting up there, with roughly 650, 660, something like that, million licenses currently running Windows 7. So we're finally way past XP, which is nice, in over 200 countries. And now I keep advancing myself here. Okay, and so that's why we're seeing so much anticipation for what Windows 8 is going to be. Now, of course, depending on who you talk to, you might get some feedback from people who think maybe it'll be successful, maybe it won't. There's sort of a lot of talk about that. I know Windows Phone hasn't quite reached some of the levels that we might have hoped, but the nice thing with Windows 8 is so far all the reviews that have been coming out have been generally very positive, and the store, we're starting to see a lot of new stuff come in there, so we're pretty excited about that. Now, one of the things that a colleague of mine, Doug Holland, he wrote an app, and this is just his experience. He wrote it for Windows Phone, and he wrote a stopwatch app. So you might think, okay, stopwatch is not too terribly exciting of an app. In fact, most people, even non-developers, can write a stopwatch type of app fairly quickly, but he wanted to get it in first, and so he had it in there when Windows Phone launched. And the interesting thing about it is that it's still on the top of the charts inside the Windows Phone marketplace. And when you look at the other apps that are in there, the top apps sometimes aren't particularly, great, you might think, in terms of an app. They're not Angry Birds, or they're not Office, or any of these other big apps. Well, a lot of them are pretty simple, but they were in there first, and so they tend to be at the top. And when people see them, they typically download them. Right? You see something at the top, you download it, and that kind of perpetuates the cycle of the app staying on top. And most of these have very good reviews as well. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. And I know, again, with the developer team we're all trying to do the same thing. We had our apps in there when it first launched. So it's a great opportunity to get in there early. So again, I'm here as a resource for you if you'd like to get more information about developing. So as I mentioned earlier, RTM is already available to MSDN subscribers. So if you have that subscription, as most of you might already be aware, you might already be running it, you can use it today or get a 90-day eval. Any demos that I have here, we're now basing everything off of RTM. We've been doing dev camps now for the past few months, and between Visual Studio 12 and Windows 8 and Server, we're always kind of have this big mishmash between different versions. So we always like to be clear about what we're running. So you might have heard of the new Windows Runtime or WinRT. So what I'd like to do is explain kind of what that is and how it impacts you and administration within your environment and desktop support and so forth. And obviously the Windows Store, that's another thing that's big inside the enterprise. Specifically, we get a lot of questions about, well, how are we going to manage our line of business applications? Is there a way we can do this without having to go through the Microsoft Store? Can we sideload those? So hopefully I'll be able to answer all those questions for you. So there's basically two flavors of Windows 8. There's Windows 8 on x86 or x64. That's really any Intel-based PC that you're currently running, or AMD, or any other x86 architecture. So pretty much everything out there now running Windows is on that. And that's the full-featured platform, and again, what I've demoed up here. And that gives the full desktop experience. So the start screen is still that modern UI experience, and I'm trying very hard to not use the word Metro, because we're not supposed to use that anymore, as you probably have heard. We used to call the start screen Metro, and kind of was a cool name, but for a few reasons we no longer do so. But modern UI is much nicer, don't you think? Yeah, so anyway, but we have the x86 Intel architecture, but we also have what's called WOA, or Windows on ARM. So ARM chips, as you might be familiar with, are just a different architecture, really designed for very low power consumption devices. And we're seeing that a lot in smartphones and tablets. And so that's why we decided to port Windows to run on ARM processors, so that we can have smaller form factor devices, typically small surfaces, like the Surface PC or Lenovo IdeaBook and so on. So those are typically the real small form factor PCs. Now there is a restriction on that, and that is you don't get the full desktop experience. So while there is a desktop mode, on WinRT, or for Windows on ARM, it only allows you to do very basic things like file operations and computer management tasks, that kind of thing. You cannot install your legacy software. So if you have line of business apps that were built either with .NET or Visual Studio or something else that's just more legacy, you won't be able to run those on Windows on ARM. So that's just something to be aware of. Otherwise, the WinRT, which is the start screen, that runtime, it's equivalent on both. So any application that's available inside the Windows Store, that can get downloaded and run on either architecture just fine. Okay, so managing your desktops for Intel chips or x86 chips. Obviously, machines can join a domain. My machine up here is domain joined, and they're typically managed through either group policy, system center. We also have a internal store, or essentially what we call a self-service portal, which organizations can set up to host their line of business applications. So while you can still leverage System Center or some other package distribution tool that you might have inside your organization to push down applications, you can also use a self-service portal, which essentially is like a storefront for your organization and only available inside your organization. So the idea there is it doesn't make sense to have applications put in the Microsoft Store that only apply to users within an organization. So by default, a machine that you might pick up, say, at Best Buy or order online, when that comes, it has certificates that only trust applications from the Microsoft Store, but when you join a domain, it can issue additional certificates to trust a number of internal self-service portals that you might have inside your organization. So you'll be able to go in and see line of business apps and install them, and they can be all managed through System Center, group policy, or whatever else you want to be using. Now with Windows on ARM, machines cannot join the domain, so you cannot have a domain join machine, but they can be managed. And essentially what happens is a screen pops up. In fact, I think I've got a picture of it here. It's something like this, where this is from the desktop of a machine running Windows on ARM. And we still have the control panel, that kind of thing. In this case, the person puts in their Exchange credentials, and you can go, what we'll do is we're going to have a System Center-like ability to manage Windows on ARM devices in the cloud. So essentially, this can get provisioned in the cloud. We don't have all the details, or I should say I don't have all the details of what that's going to look like yet. But essentially, it allows IT administrators to set this up and to still apply certain restrictions and security rules and so forth onto machines that belong to an organization but are still running just the ARM chipset. Okay, so those security settings get applied when the users connect, and again, they still have access to that internal store, that self-service portal that you might have set up inside an organization. And this is an example. This is just a mock-up, and I know they've changed it around a little bit, but this is an example for what a self-service portal might look like. In this case, for a fictitious bank. But the idea is you can have line of business applications. In this case, it's you have your finance apps, your engineering apps, your HR, tools, productivity, and so forth. And that could be, again, depending on the user and depending on the rights assigned, you might see different apps or get them published to you, that kind of thing. But this is what it might look like for users, again, inside the organization. So the Windows 8 platform itself. So what we've done is we still have, of course, underlying everything is the Windows core operating system. And typically applications that are written today are done through either C#, VB, .NET, or C or C++ built on top of Win32. Or in some cases using HTML and JavaScript or Silverlight out of browser, those kinds of things all running in the desktop. And that sits on top of the OS. Now with WinRT, it's a little bit different. There's an application model that sits on top of the Windows core operating system, and it abstracts everything that the operating system has. So instead of this huge library of Win32 and all these native calls that are there, we still support that because we know that so many applications are just, there's millions of applications that rely on all of those underlying APIs. But we wanted to make it simpler and a little bit more modern. So the WinRT APIs makes it really easy to use devices, printers, graphics and media, and communication and data. It makes it very easy to use all those. And the development choices are not actually all that different from doing desktop apps. C# or VB using what we call XAML, which is basically a script-based markup language for defining how elements look on a page, very similar to, in concept anyway, to HTML. Or C or C++, and the main benefit there of using C++ on the desktop is that that is the only way you can do DirectX on Windows 8. So for those who are game developers and writing games that require that 3D immersion experience, we'll be doing C++ development. But the other thing that we have is HTML and JavaScript supported as a first-class citizen inside Windows 8. So what that means is a lot of the applications that you can download inside the Windows Store are actually just HTML applications, and they look and feel just like HTML they look and feel just like regular desktop or these other modern UI applications, but you wouldn't know it. And the advantage of having that is that it makes it much easier for those who have a web background or for those who don't have any experience with .NET to be able to author applications that run in Windows and not have the task of learning .NET or a programming model that they might not be familiar with. So just as an example, if I go back to my start screen, and over here on my games, I have Cut the Rope. Cut the Rope is a lot of fun if you've never played it. But essentially, Cut the Rope is a fun game where you go in and you have to basically feed the frog the candy by slicing it. And that level's pretty easy, but it gets a little bit more complicated as we go. Oh, see, I already messed up. So that's Cut the Rope. This is everything here inside this application is written completely in HTML5. It's not a .NET application, but you really wouldn't know that because if you were at the start screen, it shows up, it has a live tile just like every other app, and the JavaScript engine that runs, we call that Chakra, that was the code name for it, that gives you full access to all the WinRT APIs under the hood. So if you are a developer or a web developer and you're used to working with JavaScript libraries like jQuery, for example, you can still leverage all of those and write applications, but the WinRT libraries are there for you to use as well, and that can provide I/O access to the underlying file system or do other things inside WinRT, access to the devices and the sensors and so forth that are there. Okay, so basically, with inside these APIs, they're segmented out into a number of categories, user interface, that basically will depend on, as a developer, how you're developing them, and give you access to things within the application, such as tiles or what kind of input or how you're going to handle input. The devices themselves also have APIs, so you direct access to the sensors or near-field communication, geolocation, and the idea was to consolidate all of this into one architecture to make it real easy to program, just like with Windows Phone, for example. Instead of having to, if anybody managed devices back in, with what was it, Pocket PC, and there was the Windows, not Windows Phone, what was it? It was Windows Mobile, that's what it was. It was a nightmare to manage a lot of different devices because they all had different capabilities. It's kind of like where Android is going today, where they all have different set of sensors, and the problem specifically with Windows Mobile was that they all had different APIs. And that made it really hard to write software because if you wanted to support the compact iPac devices, it was a little bit different from supporting other ones. And at least one thing that everybody is getting right today, whether it's iOS or Android or Windows, is unifying all of those calls so that regardless of the device type that you're on, that when you call to get the compass or you call to get the geolocation, is that it's one unified type of architecture. And that's really the advantage of having a Windows modern app, an app that's in the store, running. And all of these run within a sandbox as well. So that's a little bit of a difference too, is that if you have older apps that do a lot of disk I/O on the file system and talk to SQL Server and do all those kinds of things, these Windows 8 modern apps don't have the ability to do that. They're sandboxed, and what they can do, they can store files locally, but you don't have unfettered access to the file system like you did when you had standard desktop apps. So Windows RT, all the APIs, everything within WinRT is done to be asynchronous. The idea there is if you've ever had a desktop app just load and stare at you while something is going on, somewhat frozen, usually on launch because it's going to do something, that's a problem because a lot of developers, and even some of us at Microsoft, when we develop the software, you don't do everything on background threads like you should, and so what happens is the UI becomes unresponsive while something's going on. And we didn't want that to be the case with Windows 8, so we forced everything to be done asynchronously. But we did it in a way to make it very easy to do, so developers who know that writing anything asynchronously manually is quite a task. It's very difficult to write good asynchronous code just because threading and everything else makes it incredibly difficult. With WinRT, we've made that as simple as you can. So you'll see a lot of the documentation points to that, and you'll see where, in some cases, it's very easy to, without even trying, to have an app that runs, keeps the user interface very snappy and responsive, while any tasks that you do, for example, reading a file or going out to the web to pull down some data, all happens asynchronously behind the scenes, so it doesn't interrupt the smooth interface that you might be used to. Also, all the WinRT's APIs, they feel very natural in C#. So it's not .NET. It's not your standard typical .NET APIs. But you really wouldn't know the difference. You know the difference as a developer just because you're aware of it, but the way that all the namespaces are laid out, it's all logical and it's very familiar to what developers have already been used to. You can also mix and match various technologies. I know somebody, for example, who wrote a game primarily in HTML5, but then wanted to implement some AI into it because a lot of people said they wanted to have some, ability to play with by themselves on the device and have computer opponents. So you can imagine the task of writing artificial intelligence in JavaScript. It's a nightmare. Now, JavaScript is ubiquitous. So for those who don't really know much JavaScript, the advantage of JavaScript is that it's ubiquitous. Virtually everybody knows at least a little bit of JavaScript if you're a developer or have done any kind of development. Even if you're not a developer, you've probably seen some of it in a web browser when it pops up some code or there's an error. You probably have seen some JavaScript. The thing about JavaScript is that it really sucks. It's a kind of a real clunky language to work with. It's not fully object-oriented, doesn't have very good exception handling, so it's a little clunky in that regard, and it's not really as nice as any of the other modern languages that are out there. But everybody knows it and is familiar with it. And so that is, again, part of the reason why we decided to make it a first-class citizen. So a lot of these, depending on what we get into, I do have some code samples to show you what some of the apps in JavaScript look like. And also, developers who are trying to target multiple platforms, who are, say, for example, using Titanium or PhoneGap or some other way, typically, developers want to use HTML and JavaScript because even though it might be a little harder to write equivalent code in JavaScript, it allows them to target Windows, iOS, Android. It allows them to target multiple devices without having to rewrite code. And that's really the big advantage of something like JavaScript. Okay, so what's that? You saw Metro? Did I have that in there? Yeah. So I had this deal with my boss, and that was that I will refrain from using the word Metro, but I'm not taking out of all the slides that I already have. That's just too much of a pain. It doesn't seem like doing a search and replace would be hard, except some of them are in graphics. So I just decided to give up because I'm not going to painstakingly try to cover out the Metro and do that. Although the best replacement word that we can come up with, no one really liked it at Corp, but was urban. We wanted to do urban apps. We thought, because when they say modern UI, it just doesn't fit in the same space, and it just doesn't roll off the tongue the same way. But anyway, the idea there with applications, and I wanted to come back to this slide because I mentioned there's something on here that says use the right contracts. Now, I haven't mentioned contracts yet, but I have said that applications that run on the modern, the start screen, they're all sandboxed. And so that means that apps, your app or one app will be running here, and another app or mail or something else is running over there. There's no native way to talk between them. Now, on the desktop, you could talk between apps, but really no one ever did, right? Because you had to have a common way to do that. And unless somebody knows how to write against, say, the Outlook API, which plenty of people did, right? They had wrote custom plugins for Office. But there really was no good way for applications to talk to each other on the desktop. So what we've done in Windows 8 is we have this idea of contracts. Now, it might not mean a whole lot to you as a user of Windows 8 or a manager of Windows 8 infrastructure, but the idea with contracts is it defines how one app can share data with another app. And there's a whole number of different contracts. One just that comes to mind is a search contract. So if I'm on the start screen, I just start typing something if I want to search for it. If your application, or if an application supports or implements the search contract, then we're able to search your application for something. So if I have a cookbook application that implements search, which I do, and I do a search, I just type in Italian, and then I'll see the cookbook app show up, and then I can click it and get all the results from within that application. So I might see Italian recipes, for example. And so that's an example of a search contract, but there's also sharing contracts. So if you're reading a story, perhaps a news article, you might want to click share and share that to maybe an IM client or an email or something like that. So to show you what this looks like, let me think of a good example. I will load this app, and one of the things that you'll see on the right side of the screen, we call these charms, and you can see it's search, share, start, and devices and settings. So all of these charms, they either, if you're using a mouse and you bring the mouse over to either the upper right or lower right side of the screen, that will fly out the charms. Or if you're using touch, a swipe in from the side of the machine with a finger or thumb, depending on how you're holding it, will also slide out the charms. And so the charms can do various things. Start, for example, will take you right back to the start screen. But there's also, in this case, a share icon. So this application supports share. So if, in this case, okay, this app, I guess, doesn't have anything it could share. Let's try to go into a specific story. Okay, and then share. We can share this with another application that knows how to take this. So, for example, mail. And it will bring this in directly into the mail. And obviously, mail is not familiar directly with what this application is, right? There's constantly new applications getting added. But as long as both implement the sharing contract, then we can send data back and forth. So it's a real handy way to do this securely. So you don't have to worry about apps not having the right access or worrying about potential malware. We have this set up to be a way that makes it secure, but also very restrictive in how data is passed to different apps. The other thing that we've done, and this one I'll talk a little bit more about, is roaming data to the cloud. So if you log into your machine, and maybe I'm really trying to get better at Cut the Rope or some other app, and that stores those settings, right, because it's unlocking multiple levels as I go through. But I have multiple machines. I've got 2 up here. You should see how many I have in my house. It's ridiculous. If I log into a different machine, I want all those settings to come with me. I don't want to have to maintain different settings. So built in, we have roaming settings for the user so that they will automatically transfer around. The application has to use the roaming profile. It's very easy to do. There's nothing specific the developer has to do otherwise, because we do make it a choice, right? The developer might choose to store data locally if they're caching a bunch of data. But when it comes to settings or other specific information, they might put it in roaming. So that way, when you log into your other machine at home, maybe your bookmarks or other settings transfer with you without you having to worry about doing that. And that's another principle with Windows 8, is that we've always supported multiple users per operating system. And that's something I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about. Okay, so when applications get launched, we have a package manager that pulls down all Windows Store applications. So within the Windows Start screen, in the background there's a package manager. So if you see an application either from the Windows Store or from a self-service portal that you'd like, and you click Install, the package manager goes out to the Windows Store, and it does it securely based on the certificates that it's told it can trust. And the package manager handles everything regarding installing that package. Now, Windows is by nature multiple user supported, right? We want to make it so that I have my credentials, but I want my daughter to be able to use my machine too. I just don't want her to have access to everything I do, and I also want hers to have parental controls and so forth on her profile. But if we happen to enjoy playing some of the games together, I don't want to have to download a 500 meg game multiple times for each user profile on the machine. And that's especially true, maybe not on desktops or larger laptops, but on some of the smaller footprint machines where you might only have 16 or 32 gig. That device, that file size footprint rather, can start being a little bit cumbersome with multiple users. So on Windows 8, there's a single instance store. So when an application comes down, it gets put inside a single instance. So that way, if my daughter and I both like playing the game and we have separate logins, separate profiles, that app is only living in one place. So it's only taking up however much size it takes up. It's only taking that space up once. But all of the data associated with that app, so any data that the app is using or saving, that gets stored in a per user area. So that way, I have my information and she has her information, and we're not stepping on each other or anything like that. The other real neat thing that Windows 8 does is handles updates, I think, in a much more graceful way than some of the systems that are out there today. So if you've ever had, and take your favorite, say, phone or tablet as an example, and you see that there's an update available for you, then you have to typically re-download the entire application in order to update it. Now, most of the time, specifically with games, most of the data that is within those are static resources, right? They're images or sound files, and very rarely are those changed. Usually it's just the code to fix some bugs. And so a lot of times it's actually a very small amount of the actual program that is changed, but you still have to download the whole thing anyway. So maybe if you're on your work connection or if you're on your home internet, maybe it's not such a big deal to download another 500 megabytes. But if you're on your 3G or 4G connection, you might certainly care. Or if you've got bandwidth concerns in the workplace, you might certainly care if users are constantly pulling down large updates when a new version of Facebook or something else comes out, and all of a sudden now you have everyone downloading, say, a 100 megabyte update. So the way Windows 8 does this is that there's a hash map associated with each package. A package is an application that bundles all the files and everything else within an application. And this hash map is built automatically on the back end, and when a user goes to update, if there's an update available, Windows is able to tell specifically which blocks within that hash map have changed and only download those changes. And when I say blocks within a hash map, I even mean small parts within an individual file. So even if there's one giant 100 megabyte resource file and only a few bytes of it have changed, then only a few bytes that have changed within that file get downloaded. So it means that applications, usually when they're updated, they have incremental updates, very small amounts. Updates can happen with a very small amount of bandwidth. And so we think this will make things just much more attractive on cell connections and just reducing the bandwidth footprint across networks. So I did mention that process isolation, that each application essentially exists in its own sandbox. Locally, the application has local storage that it can use. It has temporary storage, so anything that it is writing just temporarily that isn't really essential, just cached data, for example. And then there's also the roaming profile that it can write to, and anything put in roaming then is automatically synced with the user when they log into another machine. That example of search, by the way, or sharing data as a contract is how the applications from one process to another will talk to each other if you want to share data. Now, with the underlying operating system, there's obviously a lot of devices and communication things, right? There's microphones, there's webcams. And you still have access to those within the application, but that is all done either through direct APIs in the case where you're trying to read data, say, off of a camera, or through a broker if you're just, sending data off to something. There's communication brokers to handle a lot of that, or to WinRT to handle, say, for example, updates to live tiles. So a package that gets built for the store essentially consists of a few different things. There's what we call the app manifest. And that contains all the information about the application. It has the name of the application. It has the version information. It has the certificate, the block map that I mentioned earlier. It also has any declarations, so things that the application declares that it uses. So, for example, if it needs access to the phone, or if it needs access to the microphone or the webcam, then those are all declared inside the app manifest. And what that means then is that when a user clicks on an application inside the Windows Store, it will show you all of those capabilities that the app claims that it needs. Now, in most cases, you still need to get direct user consent. So, for example, if you open up the Maps application, it will ask you, do you want to allow Maps to use your current location? So you still have to have explicit user consent to do it, but you can see that directly within the store, so you're aware of what capabilities the app is using. That block map contains that hash of every file and bits inside the package. And then finally it gets signed, and so the signature verifies the integrity of the entire package. So this AppX then, this file with the .appx extension, that is essentially a fancy zip file that contains all of that, and you can actually, I think you can rename it to just .zip and open it up. It is a standard format, and then you can see all of those. But that's what end users then take and deploy directly up to the Windows Store to have it ingested into the system. So that process, like I mentioned earlier, just opened today, and so as a developer, that's the file you would take and put up into the system. So let me check with the guys on time. Time for a break. Okay, I saw some hand gestures going on, so wasn't sure what that meant. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll stop there for a little bit. We'll take a break, and we'll come back in a little bit and finish up. So the question is, how does the Windows roaming compare to the Citrix roaming? To be honest with you, I'm not familiar with the Citrix roaming, so... so
it's way better.
Is it? So tell me a little bit about it. How does it work? Okay, so what kind of data is it capable of syncing? Just, is it primarily just for migrating data, or you know, like a profile, like a roaming profile, for example, or?
Well, it's really set up for mobility so that you can, you know, utilize a smartphone or laptop or Surface to do work from anywhere.
Okay, all right, good to know. Yeah, it's.
And also, you know, like work from your home desktop to your, you know, corporate servers and stuff like that.
Right. So I don't know how deep it goes with the actual profile within Windows. Really, the way the Windows 8 roaming works is.
Citrix has worked with Microsoft. They're your partners. I mean, so.
Right. Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is that I'm not familiar with what, you know, in that case, if you're using it, say, in an organization, if you're using it to just transfer, say, individual settings or have roaming profiles, you know, I haven't actually used it. We use different stuff, so I haven't used it. But, yeah, the way the Windows 8 roaming settings are designed to work are really just there for applications to take advantage of and to allow applications to use it seamlessly. So the idea there is that if you're writing an application, you can just put data there without having to worry about building a cloud-based synchronization framework, and that's already built inside Windows 8 for users, right? So that when I have my profile and applications, whether it be my cut the rope score or something else, those will automatically roam for me, and Windows 8 handles that behind the scenes. So the idea really is to make it easier for apps to be able to share data with other machines as you log in across different devices. Are we replacing Mesh? No, not exactly. So Mesh was, Mesh was really cool. We still have, I didn't quite catch you, I'm looking around somewhat in that way, but Mesh was pretty cool. No, it's not really replacing Mesh. In this case, what we're trying to do is, again, just make it easy for developers to use it without having to roll their own framework for it. But there still is the capability to use, in fact, built in with Windows 8 is SkyDrive, as well as some other locations that you can store data to, and those will all sync with their own respective frameworks. So in the case of SkyDrive, if you put, say, pictures or something else or documents inside SkyDrive, that automatically syncs depending on which device you log into. But no, it's not really designed to replace anything as much as just supplement applications within the Windows Store. By the way, someone had come up to me in the break and mentioned Xbox integration, and I think we might have mentioned something about Media Center, but I don't know if I don't know if you saw it, but I have the Smart Glass application running on my desktop, and I don't have an Xbox here, so I can't demo it, but if you might have heard of Xbox Smart Glass, but the idea with it is that you can run the Smart Glass application either on your tablet or phone or other mobile device or on your laptop, and it can integrate with your Media Center or your Xbox to offer either control or an augmented kind of experience where you can scroll through, you can see what's available, and then maybe select a movie and have it go on automatically. So it's a pretty cool app. It is in there in the Windows Store. So if you are playing around with Windows 8 and you have an Xbox at home, be sure to check out and play around with the Smart Glass app. So I mentioned already a little bit about the app manifest, and what it does is it makes these explicit declarations as to what it does. For example, does it have access to your music, your pictures, or any of those other files, what devices on the system it uses. If it does make use of network, it has to declare that, for example, if it needs internet access. And then also any of the app contracts. And I'll show you, I had a couple of developer-related questions in the break, and I'll show you the app manifest when we're done going through this. Now, there's a little bit of a distinction between app data and user data. This really actually is nothing new, but it's something that we call out a little bit more in Windows 8. App data refers to data that is specific to a given application. So settings that belong to an application or any files that that application needs as resources. And then any session state information that that app needs. As you're using an app, typically it will be storing some kind of information about your current context. But then there's also user data, and sometimes we commingle these within our applications, and you know what I'm talking about. If you've had a desktop and you kind of have different locations for storing photos, and maybe you make use of the libraries that are supposed to consolidate different locations for phone or for music files, but usually it just ends up becoming kind of a mess, as I'm sure you might agree with. So one of the guidelines that we have with developing Windows 8 applications is that we're making the correct use of these locations for app data and user data. So the per user data represent any data that is open, potentially open to all applications to use. So for example, if you've got photos that are being stored on your machine, you would want your Flickr app, you might want your email app, you'd want different apps to be able to use those pictures. Same thing with music or videos and so forth. Now, within an application, if you've got an app that allows you to take pictures of something, right, because you can imagine there are lots of different apps that will let you do that. You might want to go around and take pictures of a certain theme or have auto-correction capabilities within an app and so forth. All of that data then ideally gets stored in the user data section under the user's photo. So then those photos then can be synced. Say if you store them in SkyDrive, they can be synced automatically. Or usable in other applications, so that should the user later on come along and decide to delete the application, it doesn't delete all of that data along with it. So we make that distinction a little bit just to specifically when we're working with developers to make sure they understand that when they're capturing data, where do they want to put it? And likewise with settings, that you're not storing settings, for example, inside the documents section that is specific to only a single application. So regarding the roaming profile, the way that this works a little bit with the application is that an application will be able to write to a local storage provider, and that will automatically sync. Every user account is tied to, in the back end, a Microsoft account, and that data then that any applications use will automatically sync. And if it so happens that the person who is using an app is not currently connected to a network, then the data will sync when it is next connected. So that infrastructure about managing the syncing of data for individual apps is handled behind the scenes. And as far as the app developer is concerned, they just deal with read and writing to specific area within the application data, which in code looks a little bit like this, where we have a call into the windows.storage.application data, and it's within the roaming settings. In this case, just for purpose of example, it's a name value pair of a potential setting you might have called items per page. But the idea is when we read and write data to that section, that will be automatically synced on the back end without the developer having to do anything. So talking a little bit about tiles, you've noticed perhaps that the tiles come in two sizes. On the start screen, you've got the square tiles and you have the wide tiles. Obviously, you tap on the tile to launch an application, and the idea with these is that we support live tiles that can either just have basic information or have updating information on the back end. Tiles can support two different sizes. So for example, if there's that stock application that takes up a lot of space with information, I might not want all of that on the screen, or I could see where some users might prefer it to be wide, others might prefer it to be small. So there's an option that the user can shrink the app or toggle between just a normal square tile and a wide tile based on their preference. And it will be up to the application at that point to determine what each tile looks like and then what information to put on side of each tile. And that would be an example for if you were to have images and the types of stuff. Obviously, you can put that peek behind the scenes. Now, tiles also have badges, what we call badges, which are essentially a number or a glyph in the bottom right of the application tile. And the idea with it is that it will either support a number or a glyph representing some type of action. Like in this case, it's a pause icon or glyph. You can see there's a bunch of different predefined glyphs. And the idea with that is if you have a music app that's playing, you want to just see the fact that it's playing, or if you have a number of unread messages, you're going to want to see the number of unread messages. So that number then will appear in the bottom right. And as a developer, you have complete access to that as well. It's all handled pretty easily within code, and you can decide exactly how to show that and remove it or expire it however you'd like. Now, I mentioned earlier tonight that there's also secondary tiles, the idea of taking an individual tile and then pinning that as a secondary tile, so they both launch the same application, but the tile itself will show different data based on what the user selects. So deep within the application, we call this deep linking. If you offer that within an application, or if you see that within an application, it will say something like pin to start, and I'll show you that in the cookbook example, and then it will allow you to pin something directly to the start screen. The nice thing about that, too, though, is, as an example here, if I've got the weather in Redmond pinned and I launch the weather app, obviously I want to see what the weather in Redmond looks like, so it would go to that directly from within the app. If I had another weather tile pin that was Charlotte, then when I open up the app, it would bring me instantly to Charlotte. So instead of having multiple locations saved within the weather app and then having to constantly toggle between which one I want to see, it's just convenient to have the app launch directly to whatever endpoint within inside the application that I'd like to see. Now, another thing that you might already be familiar with a little bit, especially if you use email, because email simulates this, although in Outlook on a traditional desktop, it's actually not using toast notifications. In this case, this is a built-in feature of the OS. But the idea is that a lot of times with email or instant messaging, you want to see some kind of notification, similar to what Outlook would typically show you. Now, sometimes I like that, sometimes I don't, and you're probably of the same mind, where sometimes the distraction can be a little bit much for these notifications that come in. But the idea here is that Windows 8 supports toast notifications that are these badges that can fly in, and they are very much in your face about, say, a new message or a new instant message or something else. And there's a whole bunch of different predefined templates. They're all XML-based that the developer can choose. So, for example, they might choose one that has an image and text, or some have bold, some have, so they're all a little bit different with what they look like, and the developer will choose what they want to see. And if the end user allows notifications either on the entire system or for that app, it's customizable, then the application can send those notifications down. So again, that's typically done within email and communications, because you want to see that. You want to know right away if someone's trying to call you or send you a message. You might want to see those notifications right away. We typically encourage developers not to use that unless they have to, just because we all know that notifications are a little bit annoying at times. But there's also the capability now with applications and these tiles that update. They update they call them live because they update in real time. You can do that locally in code, or applications can do that, right? So as my system is running, every so often, using a periodic background agent, these applications can run and go out and maybe fetch weather updates or fetch stock updates, those kinds of things based on a schedule that it dictates and that the system manages, so that it's not a burden onto the system. But there are also situations where you want a back-end service to push down a notification without having the app to actually have to poll or go out to get that. So an example might be a weather alert where all of a sudden there's a severe thunderstorm warning, and you're going to want your application to push down a notification to the end user without having the end user to open an app and actually fetch or see that update. So the way that works is through the Microsoft Push Notification Service, and this is included within any app that is out there. And what I mean by that is it's free to use as a developer. It's included within the cost of the store, and we'll get into that in a minute. But the way this works is over here on the left side is Windows 8, and everything in blue is stuff we write, and everything in green would be stuff the developer writes or part of a particular application. And in the background on Windows 8 is this notification client that runs behind the scenes, and it talks to the Microsoft backend notification service. So the two are constantly in communication, so that whenever a notification comes through, we know how to get in touch with your machine. Now, on the desktop is a particular application, and we're going with that weather example, so we'll stick with it. So you've got your modern UI style weather application running. And when the application first runs, what it does is it asks the notification client platform for what's called the channel URI. And that looks like a really long string, but it's essentially a URL, https://sn.notify.windows.net, and a whole lot of base64 encoded stuff. But you get that URI and you store that as a string, and essentially that gets stored inside your application or the weather application, and then you would send that up to your back-end service running somewhere, probably in the cloud or in your data center or wherever it is that your stuff runs. And so now your cloud service is aware that my machine, and it might not know anything about me, it might just know that I know that there's some user at this endpoint, or maybe it asked for my information and it knows my name, or maybe it doesn't ask for my name but it knows my location. So those are all part of that manifest that asks for what information are you willing to share with your application. But that now is all stored on the cloud service. So the example of a weather app, it would make sense that it knows my location and it now knows the channel URI. So as the back-end web service monitors for weather alerts, if one comes up, say, within a certain radius, what happens is that the cloud service now, I could send a post, HTTP post over to the Windows notification service, which is essentially just HTTP post to that large channel URI. And what the Windows notification service does on the back end is it will then broker that notification down to the end user's machine. So what kind of notification can it send? It can send any notification that you'd like. It can send a toast if there's some kind of emergent issue you want the user to be aware of, or it could send a tile notification that might just update the tile with the current weather conditions, for example. So it's up to your service to decide what kind of notification it wants to send down, and it's also up to the user to decide to determine what kinds of updates they're willing your application to accept. Okay, so a little information about the store. So when we launch, we just opened up today for developer registration. When we launch, we'll have this available, we'll have the Windows Store available in over 200 markets and 100 languages, and local pricing in about 70 markets or so. So we'll have a very large reach upon general availability. Revenue sharing, it starts at 70% for an application. So you put an app in and we get 30% of it and you keep the 70%. Once you jump up to $25,000, then the revenue sharing goes up to 80%, so you keep a larger chunk as you earn more. I don't know about you, but I think my app will do that on the second day, maybe the third day, I don't know. No, I wish. If it did, I wouldn't be here. No. So the developer registration, for individuals, it's basically $50 a year, or for companies, LLCs, it's $100 a year. The pricing, you control the price of an application. It could be priced anywhere from $1.49 up to $1,000. And I would love to see the applications that come in at that price point. I know we probably have seen them on other systems, and usually as the price gets up that high, usually the corresponding quality drops off pretty steeply, if you know what I'm talking about. But then there's also a tiered model where within the application you can have purchases over time or subscription-based purchases. You might use your existing commerce engine behind the scenes. So think like eBay, for example. You might develop, if you're eBay, you would want to develop an application that would run on Windows, but you don't want to have to go through a different commerce engine to buy and sell stuff. It's already established behind the scenes. So we do allow you as a developer to do that. We don't force you to go through us. Same thing with our ad system. I think we just renamed that. I got the email today about renaming it Bing Advertising Platform, I think is what it's called. But it used to be Microsoft Ad Center. So assuming that's true, I didn't quite read it yet, but assuming that's the case, you have the choice of either using our platform or another platform. It's really up to you. Now, a lot of people have asked me, well, why would I choose one ad platform or another? How do you possibly compare? And a few developers is that the ad platforms, the nice thing is if you haven't worked with ads yet inside applications, that's kind of one of the big way all apps are going now. They're either being ad supported or in-app purchase supported. I'll let you decide if you like either of those. It's not up to me. But within the ads, usually developers, when they go into an ad portal, they'll see something that's labeled usually ECPI or effective cost per thousand, or ECPM rather, I'm sorry. ECPM or effective cost per thousand of ad impressions. And that basically is a number that says for every 1,000 impressions of an ad, how much do you net? And it might be $1, it might be a little bit less than that. But the point is that when you have multiple developers, you hear some guy who develops an application and he says he's making, $5,000 a month in advertising revenue. Really, you don't know what that means. Are people staying in his application a lot? Does he just have larger sales? It's kind of hard to measure. And so the somewhat going way to measure that is using ECPM. And inside the developer forums that talk about this, you'll see people sometimes comparing their ECPM numbers because that lets you know whether, that person is just getting a lot more volume than you. But it also lets you know how well you're targeting ads within your application and then also decide which ad platform you might want to go with. So, for example, within the Windows Phone marketplace, I've had some experience with this with my applications, is that there's optional data that you can provide an ad platform. So, for example, if your application makes use of the user location, you would want to provide that to the ad platform on the back end because you would get local targeted ads. As a general rule, those will give you a lot higher ECPM because advertisers are willing to pay more because they know where you are and they can give you a more targeted experience. So anyway, it's a little bit probably further in depth than I intended to go on ads, but it is one of the more emerging ways people are earning money off their applications. So it's just something to be aware of and taking advantage of inside apps. Now, the other thing that we do, yeah, go ahead.
Does Microsoft certify the applications?
Does Microsoft certify the applications for use within the Windows Store? Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, that's the whole process there is to not only are WinRT applications completely sandboxed, but we also have a process that we go through both static analysis and direct analysis of an application to test and vet what the applications are doing. If you have an Xbox, one of the coolest things I personally find, especially with my kids on Xbox, is that every game has a demo that you could download and try it out. And I think that that's fantastic because it just lets you experience a game a little bit. And with that, when we saw trials, this is specifically for the phone marketplace, we had a trial API that that developers could use inside their applications. And we see that those developers who make use of the trial API see 70 times more downloads than those who don't. And so what that looks like from the end user's point of view is they open up the marketplace, they see an app, and it just says, instead of just saying buy now for whatever amount, it says try. It gives you that option to try it. And so people are much more likely to hit try than buy. And the conversion rate is much higher than those that do not have trials, and typically the bulk of the conversion happens within the first hour of downloading the app trial to begin with. And they also bring on average 10 times the amount of revenue than apps that do not support trials. So although with Xbox it's enforced to have a trial, with phone and Windows 8 we don't force it, but we just think it's something really smart to include because it just makes all that kind of difference. Now, the way we did this in phone is we had, it was developer based, which means you had to have code that said, if you're running as a trial, do this, or if not, then show the entire application. So you might make it feature differentiated or what have you. Within Windows 8, we do give you another feature, and that's time limited. So the idea with time-based trials is within the marketplace, when you're submitting your application, you can specify a trial period, say, for example, 7 days or 14 days or 30 days, and then you don't have to implement any code at all. You just put your full-featured code up there, and then Windows in the background will enforce that, and so the user can't just uninstall and reinstall it. We'll enforce that trial period. So if nothing else, there's this you can take advantage of as a developer to make sure that you at least do that. Now, I usually recommend that developers go the next step, which is to have feature differentiated, because nobody really likes time-bombed trials, you know, because the rule is, especially with a 30-day trial, you download something, you install it, but then you don't use it until like the 31st day, and it says it's expired. It's a little bit frustrating, and so I'm not the biggest fan of the free trial period, but it is the easiest way to implement a trial. So at the very least, there's that to leverage as a developer. So that sums up the store. Now, what I wanted to show in the time available, which is, none. I guess I'm minus 6 minutes. Yeah, go ahead, question.
Is Windows 8 having improvement for removing those programs after the trial? 98 through Windows 7 leaves a lot of files behind after you uninstall a program.
Yeah, so good question. So with trials, what happens after the, if you go to an uninstall, is it leaving basically a bunch of crap in the registry and all that? No, it is, again, that's the beauty of the start screen, is that everything is sandboxed and there's no lingering data or anything else behind the scenes that stays there. Now, after the trial expires, the app is still going to be there. It's up to the user to actually go uninstall it, but I think that's a good thing. The user sees it and says, it expired. Now they have the option to go in and buy it if they're that interested. Yeah, go ahead.
What are you doing to publish the permissions NAC requires? So if I'm downloading a stopwatch,
Yep.
I don't want it to have access to my location and my contacts list.
Yeah, exactly. No, if you're downloading a stopwatch app, you don't want it to have basically access to just about anything, I would think. So the way that works is, again, the app manifest, from the developer point of view, that's where they declare what they have, and that's what then gets published in the store of what it uses. So most of the time, as the user, you would see that, this app needs an internet connection, the microphone, the location. And if I saw that on a stopwatch app, I probably wouldn't download it. That's the sort of thing that we see, at least in phone, that people are a little suspicious of that. However, it does go a step further in that if, suppose in that location example, so you're out of the track, you load the thing, and it says, what it's going to do is not just going to use your location, it's going to ask you before, Windows will ask you before it gives your location to the app, requiring your explicit consent as the user to say, I allow this app to use my location. We also require, as part of the certification process, that apps allow you to turn that off if, after some time, you say, you know what, I don't want this app. Maybe I said yes earlier, but now, no, I don't want it to have my location, and then you can disable it. That's all part of the certification process, and those options have to be in there. Yeah?
What are the minimum hardware requirements for 8, and will 8 sync with another portable device like a Samsung Galaxy, or if it's running 8 as well? Can you sync the data, and can you sync the apps, or not one app per device?
Right. No, that's all great questions. So it's the question really revolves around if you've got, say, multiple devices, maybe a companion type device, so the answer is that if you can unify, you can use your standard Microsoft Store account, so you could install apps in multiple locations that belong to that same account. The only data that gets synced automatically is the per user data that is automatically taking advantage of the roaming settings within each application. However, for actually, I think I misspoke there. It would be the app data that takes advantage of those roaming settings. The user data, if they want to share pictures or what have you, those are all based on the per user location stores that are supported within Windows 8. So, for example, if I want to look at photos, you'll see here that I've got my local pictures library, I've got my SkyDrive, I've got Facebook, I've got Flickr, and I also have anything that is on any of the devices that I happen to have connected to, which are none right now. But it would make a lot more sense for me to, in this case, if I'm sharing pictures, I'm probably going to do it through Facebook or through Flickr or through my private SkyDrive location. And so we typically recommend that for those people looking to share data or to do that, that you use one of these cloud-based storage mechanisms like SkyDrive or Facebook or Flickr, et cetera, and then that way the data is shared automatically as part of that, and no matter which device you log into. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay. I thought I might have missed one part of that in there, but feel free to.
But the roaming part, is that stored in the cloud?
Yeah, the roaming part on the application level. So if a specific application wants to store data, like perhaps which stock quotes you happen to be monitoring, it's up to the app to store it in the roaming data, but we very strongly push developers, and that's part of what we're doing is we're educating developers on what to use, but that is synced automatically by Microsoft in our cloud on the back end on a per user basis. Oh, thank you. That was it. That's what I missed. Minimum hardware requirements are the same as Windows 7, minimum hardware requirements. Obviously, with Windows on ARM, that's I think that is an OEM-specific guideline, since it's not like you can buy an ARM, shell of a device and install Windows on ARM. So that's done a little bit differently, and we don't have published specs for those. Those are just more hardware specifications that Microsoft pushes out. But for the x86 architecture, it's the same as Windows 7. Yeah, go ahead.
What about the migration from Windows 7 to Windows 8? How complicated is that going to be for the general public, for guys that have to go out and repair the mistakes that they make?
Yeah, so the migration from Windows 7 to Windows 8, am I assuming the main thing you're thinking about is doing an install of Windows 8 on top of a Windows 7 installation? Right. Yeah, so far it's been, from my experience, it's been the best experience in terms of doing in-place upgrades. I have not had problems doing in-place upgrades using the release previews, and now there was the release preview, the consumer preview, and now RTM. I've not had problems doing that. Now, actually, on this one I actually ended up buying a new solid-state drive for just because I wanted to clean it out because it was full of stuff, and I just figured I'd start over. But it does work in place, and the team is really confident about it, specifically because of that incentive to upgrade to Windows 8. I think the pricing is $15, if I'm not mistaken, to upgrade to Windows 8 if you buy a new PC now, or some recent date that it's a really inexpensive update. And so I think, honestly, the biggest challenge is going to be for users to get used to the new interface as opposed to handling data migration and whatnot. So I think that'll be the biggest challenge we have. You're welcome. Yeah, go ahead.
On that question, how does it apply to Vista?
How does it apply to Vista? If you're doing an in-place upgrade over Vista, as far as I know, since none of the requirements really changed with 7 over Vista, as far as I know, it's fully supported as well on top of that. I don't have any first-hand experience doing that, but that's my understanding, is that it works on top of Vista.
Might as well ask XP.
Yeah, for XP, I don't believe you can do an upgrade on top of XP. I don't believe that's supported. I might be wrong, but I don't believe it is. We do have a lot of business users using XP. Truth is, even though XP is still very ubiquitous and out there and used by obviously a large number of people, the good news, at least from our perspective or for end users' perspective, is Windows 7 is now far surpassed XP in terms of number of users. But then also one of the problems with XP in saying we fully support an XP migration is just that the hardware goes back so far that it's really hard to say you support that because of all the devices and combinations you have going back to. In fact, that thought came to my mind while we were starting off the meeting about what kind of computers I was using in 2001, and it was XP and some really old stuff compared to today's standards. Yeah, go ahead.
What are the different, versions of Windows 8? Are they simple like Windows 7, like Basic and Premium?
Right. So essentially, the primary versions of Windows 8, there's the Windows 8 just Windows 8, and then there's Windows 8 Pro, which has all of the stuff like, gosh, I'm seeing the feature thing in my head, but it's not coming to me, but I'll table that for the moment. But that has the things like domain, join, and all the stuff that typically business has, so that was more like the Windows 7 Professional was. That's how they relate in terms of feature parity. And then also there's Windows on ARM as well, but that's strictly an OEM thing in terms of them supporting their hardware spec. But essentially the two main flavors is what consumers have, is just plain Windows 8 and then Windows 8 Professional.
Which supports, do they both support drive encryption?
So the question is, do they both support drive encryption? I don't believe so. I believe you can only have the built-in drive encryption with Windows 8 Pro, but I can bring up the feature thing and we can go through it once we're wrapped. Yeah, go ahead.
How about printers and scanners and things like that? A lot of those times when you go to a new system, they don't support, and then you have to scan your own printer as well. No one bothers to make an app or a driver for it anymore.
Yeah, so what about device support and driver support? To the best of my knowledge, there's fortunately, the vast majority are USB-based, and so as long as you have USB drivers that are current, it's not an issue. I'll give you an example. I have my, now, of course, this is a little bit of a skewed sample because it's a Microsoft mouse, but this is my presenter mouse, and the first time I used it with the system, and it downloaded the drivers and installed it, and it shows up as a Microsoft presenter mouse right away in the system. Haven't had a problem using it with printers or connecting to my Windows Home server. It runs that fine. So I haven't had anything. Do I think there's a potential for conflicts? I suppose so. I haven't heard of anything specifically yet.
I think like this, if it did support a Microsoft mouse, but what I'm worried about is my HP Epson printers.
Yeah, I would too, but I have a Canon printer that's about 5 years old, and I use it fine. Doesn't seem to impact it. I'm not saying that that would necessarily be your experience. As far as I know, it should be supported fine.
We can obviously check.
Yeah, now I know that one of the things that a lot of device manufacturers do not necessarily do is publish Windows 8 updated drivers. You know, you might not go to their site, and one thing we can't guarantee is that you go to Epson or Canon and they specifically say, we have, you know, our WICL or Windows Hardware Quality Lab certified Windows 8 drivers. However, every time I've seen that, which I've seen that now, I've been using Windows 8 for the last, 6-8 months. I've been using Windows 7 drivers with it. It supports the same driver model, especially for USB devices, and it's been just fine. I suppose there are going to be fringe cases where there are issues, though. I'm not going to deny that. There must be somebody out there is having an issue with something, I would imagine. But it's gotten a lot better with USB, just as a general rule, whether you're hooking up something to server or Windows 7 or Vista, whatever it is across the board, just USB makes that a lot less painful. Yeah, go ahead.
Also, this gentleman's been trying to ask a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm turned like this, so I'm not. Yeah, sorry. In that case, you should throw stuff at me. But
I'll ask a question when he's done on
okay, you bet. Go ahead.
When you showed the groups
Yes.
on the, whatever you call it now screen,
Yeah.
hide and unhide by group. In other words, if I'm not doing development today, can I simply hide the developer group and all of that stuff to do with developing goes away?
Yeah, that's a great question. Can you?
Back with one shot?
Yeah.
Second question, as a developer, in the store, if I'm going to sell him, he's got 25 PCs at his office. What's the process? Does he have to go in there 25 times? How does he buy 25 copies of my app for his small business?
Yeah. So great question. First one's a lot easier to answer, and unfortunately, it's no. That would be a fantastic feature. I love it. In fact, it's a little bit like having folders or something else on the start screen. I would love to see that. We've talked on our internal aliases. We have people throwing around tons of feature ideas of how they'd like even smaller tiles or the ability to group tiles and store stuff within, have a tile as a folder. You know, I've seen it all, and they're all, well, not all, many of them are great ideas like that. But unfortunately, no, you don't have that capability today. As for if you're selling something to a business, in that case, unfortunately, usually the best thing to do would be to use a different commerce engine behind the scenes that isn't based on a per user type of license. So in other words, you would, in this case, you could make an app hidden but available so that they can download and use it, or perhaps it's in a different, if you're an ISV, they wouldn't necessarily have an individual storefront, but you can leverage, say, a different commerce engine. I mentioned, say, eBay, but you can use whatever you want behind the scenes to then handle licensing instead of going through the store in that case. Hopefully we'll have something better in time, but it's not there right now. And okay, now you.
Yeah, Windows 8 has been heavily reported as being a much lighter weight version of Windows 7.
Yeah.
What steps has Microsoft taken to ensure this?
Yeah, so it's been touted, say, as a much lighter weight system. Well, first, with the start screen and the apps all being sandboxed and being very limited in how they can run, you instantly are limiting how many apps are running. And so if you've used to desktop, you could see that you've got any umpteen million processes running at any given time. Now, there's nothing stopping me from repeating that on my Windows 8 machine if I install all that desktop stuff and I just build up my system like I did with Windows 7. I mean, that's both the curse and the great thing about Windows is the ability for me to do that. And I need that ability because I use a lot of legacy software that is not written for WinRT. However, all the applications that are being done for WinRT, because they're sandboxed, we have very tight control over their memory footprint, their how much processor, CPU, everything else that they use, and also if they're doing things in the background, how we allow that and how we dictate that. So I think you'll see that particularly with Windows on ARM, which has a much smaller footprint in terms of power and not just power consumption, but also power from a CPU power, the interface is really fast and fluid, as we like to say. And it doesn't really matter how many apps you have on it. It all seems to work regardless of how you grow it. But like I said, with Intel, you could still do that on your desktop and still blow it up. And most of the developers, we still have all that. We still use SQL Server. We still have IIS. We still have all this stuff running. And so to a certain extent, that's going to slow down my workstation, not an appreciable amount, but that's for me being a developer. So as an end user, particularly ones in your organization, hopefully they're a little bit more of a lockdown profile, not all of us running around as admins, and they can get away with a lot smaller of a required footprint and dealing less with issues like, oh, it's locking up, or it's not booting, or it's booting slowly. All those go away. In fact, I'll be perfectly honest with you now, you could say that this is because I'm running Intel, but just for fun, I compared the start time of this against an iPad, and this actually starts a lot faster. Now, I know you could argue that, oh, it's running a Core i7 chip, which it is, so maybe it's not a fair example, but it does boot really fast, and you're not going to see that slow increase that typically happens as you install Windows, and software on top of it, how the start goes from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 seconds. It stays really responsive on top of that. Yes, it is. Yes. I would agree with that. Absolutely, it is. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
On the subject of legacy software again, how does legacy software work? Is it like in a compatibility mode, or does Windows 8 have a compatibility mode?
Yeah, great question. So Windows 8, how does legacy software work? There is compatibility modes, just like with Windows 7. However, all the desktop apps that work in Windows 7 today will work on Windows 8. They just work in the desktop. Desktop apps won't work on Windows on ARM, however. So if you have those nice little snappy devices, you can't install Visual Studio or Outlook or...
The main software I'm talking about using is like some professional DJ software.
Yep.
Because I'm sure they're not going to have a Windows 8 version.
Right. Either right away or perhaps then never, right? It kind of depends. But yeah... Right, yeah, that could very well be. And some of those apps will do significant investment to rewrite. And so, no, all those will continue to work in the desktop. Yeah, go ahead.
What about viruses and malware?
Yeah, viruses and malware. Users still may choose to install that on x86 from a desktop standpoint to guard their underlying OS if they're installing a lot of stuff locally. From a WinRT, from the start screen experience, everything is managed by the OS in Sandbox, so it doesn't have the capability to break out of that. So that's a very similar model to, say, iOS in that case, where hopefully, and I say hopefully, that no virus is needed in those cases. So I think I'm out of time. So I'm more than happy to take questions after we wrap. I also have my laptop and this Slate device, which is a touch device. If you have more questions and want to play around with it, happy to do so afterwards. All right. Thank you.